The ribbon should not have been there. Cale Arden, Alpha King of Salanthe, stood in the center of the war chamber with his arms crossed and his patience thinning into a wire. Around him, 6 of his most senior generals waited in tense silence, their eyes fixed on the great wolf that paced beside the long oak table. None of them spoke. None of them moved. They had all been summoned at dawn, and dawn had long since passed, and still the king's wolf had not allowed itself to be persuaded back into its master's skin. Because the wolf was wearing something it should not have been wearing. Tied around its great, shaggy throat, just beneath the curve of its jaw, was a strip of pale green silk, no wider than a finger, frayed at one end, faded by countless washings, the kind of ribbon a kitchen girl might use to tie back her hair while she worked, then forget on a stair railing or a windowsill, never expecting to see it again. It had no business being on the throat of a god. "My king," said Veshenmaro, the first general, his voice carefully neutral. "Perhaps if we tried scissors?" "No." The word came out as a low rumble from the wolf's chest. Not quite a growl. Not quite human. Cale's amber eyes flickered with something dangerous, and Vashen lowered his head and stepped back. The wolf had been pacing for 3 hours. Cale himself remembered very little of how the ribbon had come to be there. He had gone hunting at moonrise the night before, alone as he often did, running the old paths along the eastern ridge to clear his head before the council meetings of the new week. He remembered the cold air, the smell of pine, the silver pull of the moon on his blood. He remembered the wolf taking him, the way it always did, without protest or struggle, because they were one creature wearing 2 faces. And then, somewhere in the deep hours, the wolf had come to a place it had no memory of choosing. He had returned to himself just before dawn, lying in the great stone courtyard of the keep, with his men shouting around him and his beast refusing, with an obstinacy that bordered on rebellion, to release its form. When he had tried to pull himself back into his body, the wolf had snarled. When he had tried to summon his human shape by force of will, the wolf had simply lain down and pressed one massive paw over its own throat, where the green ribbon was tied. "Mine," the wolf had said, in the wordless way wolves spoke to the men they shared. "Whose?" Cale had asked. The wolf had not answered. Or perhaps it had. Perhaps the answer was the ribbon itself, and Cale simply did not yet understand the language it was speaking. "Send for the spirit reader," he ordered now, the words rumbling through the wolf's chest. "The old one, from the temple by the cliffs, not the court one. I do not trust the court one with this." Veshen bowed. "At once, my king. And clear this room. All of you." The generals filed out without protest, though Cale could feel their fear and their fascination chasing them down the corridor. By tomorrow, every noble house in Salanthe would know that the Alpha King had returned from a moonlit hunt wearing a kitchen girl's ribbon and could not, or would not, take it off. When the great doors closed, Cale lowered himself onto his haunches before the cold hearth and stared at his own reflection in the polished silver of the fire screen. His amber eyes stared back, set in the long, elegant face of a wolf the size of a horse. Black fur threaded with the faintest silver at the muzzle. Old scars across the shoulder from a war he had won before he was 20. And around his throat, like a vow whispered in a language he could not read, that small green ribbon. He pressed his nose to the screen. The metal was cold. The reflection wavered. And somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the wolf's heart and beneath his own, a thing he had never felt before stirred and uncoiled and recognized. A scent. Faint. Almost gone. Bread flour. Crushed thyme. The clean, astringent smell of soap made from rosemary and ash. And beneath all of it, something warmer, something living, something that smelled like a person whose hands worked too hard and whose laughter was probably very quiet and whose heartbeat, if he had ever stood close enough to hear it, would have sounded like home. The wolf made a sound. A low, broken sound. The kind of sound an enormous creature makes when it has lost something it did not know it owned. "Find her," the wolf said. "Find who?" Cale answered, and his own voice trembled in his mind, because he already knew he would not be allowed to refuse. 3 floors below the war chamber, in the hot, bright chaos of the lower kitchens, a girl named Sable Farrowin was on her hands and knees, looking for a ribbon. She had searched the linen press, the stair landing, the narrow corridor behind the spice cabinets where she sometimes slipped to catch her breath when the head cook was shouting. She had searched the courtyard well, the laundry sheds, the stone trough where they soaked the cleaning rags. She had searched her own narrow cot beneath the eaves, tearing back the thin blanket with hands that had begun to shake. The ribbon was not in any of these places, which was impossible, because the ribbon never left her. The ribbon had been tied to her wrist when her mother had left her at the Foundling Gate of Salanthe Keep 18 years ago. The ribbon had been the one thing the matron had let her keep when every other scrap of her infancy had been burned for fear of disease. The ribbon had been wrapped around her braid every morning of every year of her short, hard life, because Sable had nothing else of her own in this world, and the silk against her skin felt sometimes like the ghost of a hand she could not remember holding. She had tied it in her hair last night before she had gone to scrub the lower hearths. She remembered. She had looked at her reflection in the dark water of the rinse barrel and seen the small green flicker of it against her dark braid and thought, as she sometimes did, "This is mine. This little green thing is the only thing in the world that is mine." And now it was gone. Sable sat back on her heels in the cold flagstone hallway and pressed her fists against her eyes. She would not cry. Cooks did not cry in the Salanthe kitchens. Cooks who cried were sent down to the scullery, and Sable had clawed her way up from the scullery with her knuckles and her teeth, and she would not be sent back for the sake of a length of silk. But the ribbon. Oh, the ribbon. Sable Farrowin. The voice belonged to Mistress Halver, the head of household, who could appear in a corridor as silently as a draught. Sable scrambled to her feet and bowed and tried to compose her face into something useful. "Yes, mistress." "Why are you on the floor?" "I dropped a pin, mistress." "You did not drop a pin." Sable said nothing. Her ribbon, she thought. Her ribbon, her ribbon, her ribbon. The world had gone narrow, and the only thing in it was the green silk that had been knotted to her wrist when she was small enough to fit in a single hand. "There is a summons," Mistress Halver said, "from the war chamber." "For me?" "For every servant in the keep, you fool girl. Stand up. Wash your hands. The first general is calling us all into the lower hall, one by one, and asking each of us a question, and you will answer truthfully, and you will not weep, and you will not embarrass me. Do you understand?" "Yes, mistress." Sable's voice came out small. "What? What is the question?" Mistress Halver looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered in the old woman's eyes that Sable had never seen there before. Not cruelty, not impatience. Something almost like fear. "They are asking," she said slowly, "if any of us has lost a green ribbon." The flagstones beneath Sable's feet seemed to tilt. "Why?" "I do not know. But I have been told that the Alpha King's wolf is wearing one, and that the wolf will not allow it to be taken off, and that the king himself is not certain why." Mistress Halver's mouth thinned. "And I have been told that whoever owns the ribbon is to be brought to the war chamber at once." Sable could not breathe. "Now go," Mistress Halver said. "And whatever you do, girl, whatever you do." Her voice dropped. "Lie." Sable did not lie. Sable did not get the chance to lie. She walked toward the lower hall on legs that did not feel like her own, her empty wrist pressed hard against her chest as though she could hide the absence of the ribbon under her ribs. Around her, the corridors of Salanthe Keep were boiling with rumor. Stable boys whispered to laundry maids. Pages flattened themselves against walls and craned to listen. Cooks stood in their doorways with flour on their forearms and watched the procession of servants being led one by one toward the questioning room. The Alpha King's wolf was wearing a ribbon. The Alpha King's wolf would not let it be removed. The king himself had not appeared in human form since dawn. Sable heard each rumor as she passed, heard them stack on top of each other like plates being piled in a cupboard until the whole shelf could not possibly hold any more. She heard her own pulse in her ears. She heard the wet drag of her own breathing. She heard somewhere very far away the voice of Mistress Halver telling her to lie, and she knew, with the strange clarity that fear sometimes brings, that she would not be able to, because the ribbon was hers, and the moment they brought it close to her, she would feel it, and they would see her face, and she would not be able to pretend. She had never been good at pretending. The first general was waiting at the door of the lower hall when her turn came. Vacian Morrow. She knew his face the way every servant in the keep knew the faces of the great men, as a thing to be avoided, watched from a distance, never approached. He was tall and lean, and silver at the temples, and his eyes were the exact gray of a winter morning sky. Right now those eyes were tired and short on patience, and Sable understood with a sinking heart that she was the 73rd servant he had questioned today, and he was no longer expecting any of them to give him an answer worth hearing. Name: Sable Farrowin, my lord. Position: undercook, lower hearths. Have you, in the last 2 days, lost a green silk ribbon? The world stopped. Sable opened her mouth and closed it, and opened it again, and a small soft sound came out of her that was not a word. Vacian Morrow's gray eyes sharpened. He had been about to wave her on. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the half-formed gesture of his hand. He had been about to send her back to the kitchens with the same dismissive nod he had given the 72 servants before her. But that small, soft sound had stopped him, and now his eyes were on her face, and now he was looking, and Sable felt her knees go. "Girl," he said, softer than before. "Look at me." She looked at him. "Have you lost a green ribbon?" "Yes, my lord." The first general drew in a breath, held it, let it out very slowly through his nose, like a man who did not yet trust himself to speak. "Where did you last have it?" "Tied in my hair, my lord. Last night, when I went to scrub the hearths." "And when did you discover it missing?" "This morning, when I woke." "Did you go anywhere unusual last night?" "No, my lord. The hearths, the scullery, my cot." "Did you see anyone unusual?" "No, my lord." "Did anyone touch your hair?" "No, my lord. No one ever." "No, my lord, no one." Vacian Morrow stared at her for a long moment. Sable was suddenly, painfully aware of every detail of her own appearance. Her threadbare apron, stained with 3 days of grease, her cracked hands, the soot under her fingernails, the cheap tin pin holding her braid because the ribbon was gone. She was a girl no one looked at twice, and she was being looked at now by one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, and his face had the strange, still expression of someone hearing a piece of news he did not want to be true. "Come with me," he said. "My lord? Come with me. Now, do not speak to anyone, do not stop, do not look back." He turned, and because there was nothing else to do, Sable followed. They went up. She had never been above the 3rd floor of the keep. The 3rd floor was as high as the senior cooks were allowed to go, and only on the rare days when the great dining hall needed extra hands. Sable had been to the 3rd floor exactly twice in her life. Now Vacian Morrow led her past the 3rd floor, and the 4th, and the 5th, up the long winding stair of pale stone that the household whispered about but never climbed. Her feet ached, her chest ached. The walls around her grew older and finer and more carved. The tapestries grew richer, and at last they came to a great pair of black oak doors banded in iron, and the first general set his hand on the wood and paused. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "When I open this door, you will see something that will frighten you. You will not run. You will not scream. You will stand very still. Do you understand?" "Yes, my lord," Sable whispered. She did not understand. She nodded anyway. "And girl." "Yes, my lord. Whatever happens in that room, whatever the wolf does, whatever the king does." His gray eyes held hers. "Tell the truth." He pushed open the door. The first thing Sable saw was the size of the room. It was vast, vaulted, cold. A great map of the kingdom was painted directly onto the stone of the far wall, and a long oak table the length of 3 carts ran down the center of the chamber, and there were chairs of black wood around it that no one was sitting in. The second thing she saw was the wolf. He was standing at the far end of the room, half in shadow, and half in the bar of pale morning light that fell through the high arched window. He was bigger than any creature Sable had ever seen. His shoulders came nearly to her chin. His head was the size of her torso. His fur was black, and his eyes, when they swung toward her, were the color of old gold coins held in firelight, and they were not the eyes of an animal. They were the eyes of a person, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that knocked the air out of her chest. And tied around his throat, at the join of his great jaw, was a frayed strip of pale green silk. The wolf made a sound. It was not a growl. It was not a snarl. It was a sound Sable had never heard a living creature make, and would never quite be able to describe afterward, even to herself. A long, shuddering exhale, a wordless, helpless, full-bodied recognition. The sound of a question being answered. The wolf took one step forward, then another. And then, with a slowness that seemed almost reverent, the great black animal crossed the cold stone floor and lowered its enormous head until its nose was a hand's breadth from her belly. It breathed her in. Sable did not move, could not move. She was aware of the warmth coming off his fur, of the faint clean smell of pine and snow, and something deeper. Something that smelled the way a thunderstorm smells just before it breaks. She was aware that she was being seen, and not by the wolf alone, but by something behind the wolf. Something looking through those amber eyes from a great distance and a great longing. The wolf lifted his head. He pressed his nose, very gently, to the tin pin in her hair where the ribbon should have been. And then he made the broken sound again, and lowered himself slowly onto his belly at her feet, and laid his great heavy head across her shoes, and did not move. Behind her, Marrow exhaled like a man who had just watched a building come down. "My king," the first general said, very softly, "I think we have found her." The wolf did not lift his head, but around his throat the green ribbon stirred just once, as though caught in a wind that was not blowing. Sable did not faint. She wanted to. Her body asked her to. But some stubborn, quiet thing at the center of her chest, the same thing that had kept her clawing up out of the scullery year after year, refused to let her go down. So she stood very still with the wolf's enormous head resting across her feet, and waited to be told what was happening to her. Marrow stepped carefully into the room and closed the doors behind them. "My king," he said again. His voice had changed. It had grown softer. It had grown almost tender. "Can you shift now? Can you come back to us?" The wolf did not move. "My king." A low rumble, somewhere between a growl and a sigh, vibrated through the great black body. Sable felt it move up through the bones of her feet and into her knees. The wolf opened one amber eye, fixed it on Vishen, and closed it again, with the absolute finality of a man pulling a curtain. Vishen exhaled. "I will take that as a no." He looked at Sable. His gray eyes were not unkind, but they were assessing her in a way that made her feel like a piece of cloth being measured for a price. "Girl," he said. "Sable, sit down, Slowly. Do not pull your feet from under him. He has been trying to find you since dawn, and I do not think his wolf will accept losing you again so soon. Find me? Sable whispered. My lord, I do not. I do not understand any of this. I am no one. I am a kitchen girl. I have never seen the king. I have never been on this floor before. I cannot have been. I cannot be. I know, Veshin said gently. I know, child. Sit down. There is a stool by the wall. Do not be afraid. Or be afraid, but sit anyway. She sat. The wolf adjusted his great head as her feet shifted, never lifting it, never letting her go. His weight was extraordinary. It was like having a warm boulder laid across her toes. And it was, unexpectedly, the most grounded she had felt in her entire life. As though some small frightened part of her that had always been blowing loose in the wind had at last been pinned down. She did not know what to do with that feeling. She did not let herself look at it too closely. Tell me again, Veshin said, drawing up a chair across from her. About the ribbon. Where you got it. How long you have had it. Do not leave anything out. Even small things matter now. Sable swallowed. Her mouth was dry. She could feel the wolf's slow, heavy breathing against her ankles, in and out, in and out. The rhythm of a creature who had decided, for reasons she could not fathom, that she was a thing he intended to keep. My mother left me at the Foundling Gate, she said, when I was very small. I do not remember her. I was told there was no message and no name, only the ribbon tied around my wrist, and the matron let me keep it because it was all I had. I have never untied it from myself for longer than a wash. I tie it in my hair every morning. Her voice caught. I had it last night. I am certain. I tied it in my braid before I went down to scrub. And this morning when I woke, it was gone. And I looked everywhere. My lord, I looked everywhere. Hush. Breathe. She breathed. Did your mother leave nothing else? No, my lord. No token, no locket, no mark. No, my lord. Only the ribbon, and... She hesitated. And there is a mark on my shoulder. A small one. I have always had it. The matron said it was a birthmark. Veshin Marrow went very still. What kind of mark? A curl, my lord. Like a small wave. Or, she gestured vaguely, like the curl at the top of a fern. Veshin's gray eyes had narrowed almost to nothing. On which shoulder? The left, my lord. The first general sat back in his chair very slowly. He did not look at her. He looked at a point somewhere just past her left ear, and his jaw worked. And Sable had the unsettling sense that he was doing arithmetic in his head and arriving at a sum he did not like. Veshin. The voice came not from his mouth, but from inside Sable's own skull, and she nearly came off the stool, because it was a voice, and it was not. It was a feeling shaped like a word, and it was heavy, and male, and exhausted, and it knew her name was not what she had said. The wolf had spoken. The wolf had spoken without speaking, and somehow she had heard him, and Veshin had heard him too, because the first general had closed his eyes. Yes, my king. Send for the spirit reader, the old one. Now. I have already sent my king. She is 2 days' ride. She will be here by tomorrow night. A long silence. Send a second rider. Faster horse. Tell her if she does not come by tomorrow at dusk, I will come and fetch her myself, in this form, and I will not be patient about the journey. Veshin bowed his head. It will be done. The wolf shifted his great weight against Sable's feet and made a sound that was almost a sigh. And Veshin. Yes, my king. Do not let her out of this room, not for any reason, not for food, not for the privy, not to fetch her things from the kitchens. Whatever she needs, you bring it. Whoever she wishes to send word to, you carry the word. She does not leave my sight, do you understand? My king, Do you understand? Veshin's jaw tightened. I understand. The wolf closed his eyes. Sable sat very still on her stool and tried to make sense of the fact that the most powerful creature in the kingdom had just declared, without consulting her, that she was not to be allowed to leave a room. My lord, she said carefully. Please. I have a place. I have my cot. I have my work. The head cook will— You will not be returning to the kitchen, Sable Farrowin. Veshin's voice was not unkind. Not today. Perhaps not ever. I am sorry. I do not yet know what is happening, but I know enough to tell you that the life you woke up to this morning is over. She stared at him. That is not. I know, child. You cannot just— I know. The wolf opened one amber eye, and Sable looked down at him, and she found, to her astonishment, that she was not afraid of him. She was afraid of many things in this room. She was afraid of the first general with his measuring gray eyes. She was afraid of the great cold map, and the great cold table, and the great cold weight of a future she had not asked for pressing down on her shoulders. But she was not afraid of the enormous black animal whose head was laid across her feet, because his eye was looking at her the way no creature, human or otherwise, had ever looked at her in her life. It was the look of someone coming home. She did not know what to do with that. She did not know what it meant. She did not know what she had done to deserve it, or what it would cost her, or whether it was even meant for her at all, and not for some other girl whose ribbon she had stolen by accident in a previous life. But she found, very quietly, that she did not want him to look away. The wolf seemed to understand this, because he did not. Outside the high arched window, the morning bell of the keep began to ring, and somewhere in the lower kitchens, a place Sable Farrowin would never see again as the same person who had left it, a head cook was already shouting at someone else to scrub the lower hearths, and the world was going on without her, and she was going on without it, and tied around the throat of a king's wolf was a frayed, pale green ribbon that had been knotted to her wrist by hands she could not remember. Veshin, she said. The first general turned. What? What is happening to me? He looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time the careful diplomat's mask slipped, and she saw beneath it a man who was tired and frightened and almost sorry. Child, he said, I do not know yet, but I think you may be the answer to a question this kingdom has been asking for 20 years, and I think, when we know what that question was, none of us will be the same. The wolf let out a long, slow breath against her ankles, and the green ribbon around his throat stirred again. The spirit reader arrived not the next night, but the next dawn. Sable had slept, against all expectation, in a small chamber adjoining the war room. Vishen had ordered it prepared, while the wolf still lay across her feet, and a pale, silent woman in gray livery had carried in fresh linens and a basin of warm water, and a soft woolen robe, and a tray of bread and broth and stewed apples, and Sable had eaten very little of any of it because her stomach had forgotten how to want food. The wolf had not left the war room. He had laid himself across the threshold of the small chamber's door, and he had closed his eyes, and he had not moved for the entire night. And Sable had lain on a real bed for the first time in her life and stared at the carved ceiling and tried to remember how to be a person who was allowed to lie on real beds. She had failed. She had not slept until the very last hour before dawn. When she woke, the wolf was still there, but his eyes were open, and Vishen was crouched beside him, speaking quietly. She is here, my king. She has come. The wolf rose, the slow, careful rise of a creature who had been holding himself still for a great many hours and was reluctant to disturb the world by moving in it. His amber eyes swung to the small chamber where Sable was sitting up against the pillows in the borrowed robe, her dark hair loose over one shoulder, the empty pin laid on the side table where she had taken it out before sleep. He did not enter the room. He had not entered the room all night. There was, Sable understood now, a line he was not allowing himself to cross, and the line was the threshold of her door. She did not know whether to be grateful or to break. Sable Farrowin. Veshin's voice was very gentle. The spirit reader has come. Will you dress and come into the war room? She will not enter where you sleep. She says it is not proper. Sable nodded. She slid out of the bed. The pale, silent woman in gray livery appeared from somewhere with a clean dress in deep forest green wool, simple and warm, and helped Sable into it without asking and without speaking, and Sable submitted to being dressed by another human being for the first time in her life, and felt strange and small, and very far from home. When she stepped through the doorway of the small chamber into the great cold war room, the wolf did not move out of her way. He pressed his enormous black flank against her hip as she passed, walking with her, his shoulder at the level of her ribs, so close she could feel the heat of him through the wool of her dress. She rested her hand on his fur without thinking about it. He made a small, low sound that she felt, rather than heard, and she understood. In the wordless way she was already beginning to understand him, that the touch had been permission. He had been waiting for the touch. The spirit reader was a small bent woman in a coarse robe the color of river stones. Her face was a creased map of every weather she had ever stood in. Her eyes were the strange milky blue of a cataract, and they did not quite focus on Sable, but they went very still when Sable walked into the room, as though something behind those clouded eyes had snapped to attention. "Child," the old woman said, "come closer." Sable went closer. The wolf went with her. The spirit reader looked at the wolf, looked at Sable, looked at the green ribbon around the wolf's throat. And then, very slowly, she sat down on the cold stone floor with the painful care of an old woman who had earned every bone in her body, and she patted the stone beside her. "Sit, child." Sable sat. The wolf laid himself down across her crossed legs, his head heavy in her lap. She put her hand on his great brow, because he seemed to want it there. "Veshin," the spirit reader said. "Out." "Mistress, I cannot leave the king." "You can leave the king. The king is in better company than yours." "Out." Veshin's gray eyes flickered to Sable. He waited. She gave him, after a moment, a small nod, because she did not know what else to give. He bowed and withdrew, and the great black oak doors closed behind him, and Sable Farrowin was alone for the first time in her life, with a wolf king and a witch. "Your shoulder, child," the spirit reader said. "Show me." Sable hesitated, then drew the wool of her dress aside enough to bear the curve of her left shoulder. The mark was there, as it had always been. A small soft curl, no bigger than a coin, the color of old wine against her brown skin. She had grown up calling it her fern mark, because the matron had once told her it looked like the unfurling top of a young fern, and Sable had liked the word fern, and had liked having a name for the only piece of her own body she had ever been told was special. The spirit reader looked at the mark for a long time. She did not touch it. She closed her cataract eyes and breathed out through her teeth, a long shuddering breath, like a woman setting down a weight she had been carrying in secret for many years. "Oh, child," she said softly. "Oh, you poor child." "Mistress?" Sable whispered. "You do not know what you are." "No, mistress." "And he does not know what you are." "No, mistress." "But his wolf knows." The old woman opened her eyes, and her milky gaze came as close to focusing on Sable as it ever would. "His wolf has always known. His wolf has been waiting for you, child, since the night you were born. And his wolf is the part of him that does not lie, and his wolf brought him to you in the dark when his human mind would not let him come." Sable's hand tightened in the fur of the wolf's brow. The wolf made a low, soft sound. "Mistress," she said. Her voice was very small. Please. I do not understand. The spirit reader lifted one trembling finger and pointed at the green ribbon around the wolf's throat. That is not silk, child. That has never been silk. That is a binding thread. Old magic. Older than this kingdom. Older than the wolf blood. The kind of magic the mountain women used to weave into the wrists of children they could not keep, so that whoever they belonged to in this world would find them again, no matter how far they were carried. Sable could not breathe. Your mother did not leave you, child. Your mother hid you. She tied a thread of finding around your wrist, and she gave you to the foundling gate of a great keep where she knew you would be safe, because she could not keep you safe herself. And the thread has been waiting for 18 years for the one it was tied to find. And 2 nights ago, on a moonlit ridge, the wolf of the Alpha King caught the scent of that thread for the first time, and he came to where it was, and he untied it from the hair of a sleeping girl, and he carried it back to himself, and he will not give it up because the magic in it has finished its work. Sable was shaking. The wolf made a quiet, anguished sound and pressed his great head harder into her lap. Mistress, she whispered, please, who am I? The spirit reader looked at her with infinite tenderness. I do not know your name, child. I do not know your mother's name. The thread is too old and too worn for me to read more than its purpose. But I will tell you this. She leaned closer. The mark on your shoulder is not a birthmark. It is a wolf mark. It is the mark a true mate is born with when she is born for an alpha of the old blood. There has not been one in the line of Arden for 9 generations. We thought the line had forgotten how to make them. The world tilted. No, Sable breathed. No, mistress. That cannot. I am a kitchen girl. I scrub hearths. I do not. You are what you are, child. He has never seen me. His wolf has been seeing you for years. His wolf has known your scent in the corridors of this keep every day of your life, and his human mind has never once let him understand why his feet kept turning toward the lower kitchens when he had no business being there. The wolf in her lap shuddered. Mistress, Sable whispered, what happens now? The spirit reader's clouded eyes drifted to the closed black oak doors of the war room, to the long cold table, to the painted map of the kingdom on the far wall. Now, child, she said softly, the trouble starts. It started before the noon bell. The spirit reader had not been gone an hour. The wolf had risen at last from Sable's lap and walked, slow and stiff and vast, to the bar of pale light beneath the high window. He had stood there a long moment with his amber eyes closed, his shaggy chest moving in long, careful breaths. And Sable had watched him from the stool by the wall, and understood that he was trying to come back. That he was trying, for her sake, to put the wolf away and bring out the man. Because they could not keep speaking through Veshin forever. And because there were things a wolf could not say. It was harder than it should have been. She could see that. The wolf's flanks trembled. The fur along his spine rippled twice and went still again. Twice and still again, like a man trying to take a breath under deep water and surfacing each time without enough air. And then, with a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a snarl, the great black wolf folded inward on himself, and the air in the room rippled, and where the wolf had stood there was suddenly a man. He was on his knees. He was tall even on his knees, broad-shouldered and bare-chested, dark hair tangled around his face, his head bowed and his hands braced flat on the cold stone floor. He was breathing as though he had run a long way. He was beautiful in the way storms were beautiful, the kind of beautiful that did not care whether you were watching, and the kind that left wreckage. And around his throat, knotted now against bare skin instead of black fur, was the green ribbon. He lifted his head. His eyes found her across the room. They were the same eyes. Amber, dark, set in a face Sable had never seen and had somehow always known. There were lines at the corners that had not been there in the wolf, because wolves did not have lines, and there was a small white scar through one black eyebrow, and there was an exhaustion in his bones that no creature of mere muscle and fur could carry. He was a man who had not slept enough. He was a man who had been searching for something for a very long time and had not let himself know it. He was the Alpha King of Salanthe. And he was looking at her the way a man looks at water after weeks in a desert. "Sable," he said. His voice was a low rasp, broken from disuse, or from the shift, or from something else. It was the first time he had said her name. She had thought she would feel afraid when he finally spoke. She had thought she would feel very small. Instead, she felt a strange, terrible peace, as though some wire that had been pulled too tight inside her chest for 18 years had at last been allowed to loosen. She stood up. She did not know what to say. She did not know what one said to the king who had been wearing one's ribbon. So she said the thing that had been in her throat since the spirit reader had spoken, the thing she had been turning around and around in the back of her mind like a stone in a pocket. "I do not know how to be what she said I am." Cale Arden closed his eyes. He laughed. It was a small broken sound, almost a sob, and he pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead, and he laughed. "Neither do I," he said. "Sable, neither do I. I have been a king for 12 years and a wolf for 23, and I have never in my life been a—" He stopped. He looked at her again, and his amber eyes were wet. "I do not know what the word is. I do not know if there is a word for what I am to you. I have just learned. I have just learned, Sable, an hour ago, that I have been walking past your kitchen door for years without knowing why, and I cannot—" His voice broke. He pressed his knuckles against his mouth. Sable, who had never in her life crossed a room toward a man who was crying, crossed the room toward a man who was crying. She did not know why her feet were moving. She did not know what she would do when she got there. She only knew that he was on his knees on the cold stone floor in nothing but a pair of breeches, with her ribbon around his throat, and that his great shoulders were shaking, and that no one in this enormous quiet room was going to comfort him if she did not. She stopped a pace from him. She did not quite know what to do with her hands. He looked up. "Forgive me," he said. I am not usually—" "Hush," she said, because she did not know what else to say. The word came out in the same tone Mistress Halver had once used on her, on the night she had sliced her thumb to the bone with a paring knife and tried not to cry. "Hush, girl. The bleeding stops. Hush." He closed his eyes again. She lifted her hand. She set it, very carefully, on the crown of his dark head. The Alpha King of Salanthe leaned his forehead against her belly and breathed out, and was still. She felt the heat of him through the green wool of her dress. She felt the rough catch of his hair under her palm. She felt, beneath all of it, the slow returning rhythm of a man who had been holding his breath for a long time and was at last, very cautiously, beginning to let it out. "I am sorry," he said into her dress. "I am sorry I did not know. I am sorry it took the wolf to find you. I am sorry you have been scrubbing hearths in my own house while I— You did not know. That is no excuse. It is the only excuse there is." He laughed again, the small broken laugh, and looked up at her. And for the first time since she had walked into this room, she saw him as a person and not as a king. He had a crooked front tooth. There was a faded burn scar along his collarbone, the kind a child gets reaching for a kettle. His eyelashes were absurdly long for a man so dangerous. She thought, with a kind of distant astonishment, I could love this person. She did not say it. She was not yet ready to say it. "Sable," he said, "I have to ask you something, and it is not fair, and it is too soon, and I am asking anyway because we do not have time." "Ask? Will you stay?" She looked at him. "Stay where, my king?" "Here, In the keep. In my company. Not, he shook his head. Not as my mate. Not yet. I will not ask that. I will not ask that of a girl I have known for one day, even if my wolf has known her for a lifetime. But will you stay where I can see you? Will you let me put guards at your door? Will you let me feed you and clothe you and learn your face, and let you learn mine, and find out together what this is? Because if you walk out of this keep, Sable, my wolf will follow you, and I do not know if I can stop him, and I will not have you frightened of him. She thought about this. She thought about her cot under the eaves, about Mistress Halver, about the kitchen door she would never walk through again, about the head cook shouting at someone else this morning to scrub the lower hearths. She thought about the green ribbon around his throat, and the curl-shaped mark on her shoulder, and the milky blue eyes of the spirit reader saying, "Now, child, the trouble starts." "Yes," she said, "I will stay." His eyes closed, his shoulders dropped. He pressed his forehead against her belly again, and this time she let her hand move down to the back of his neck, and she felt the green silk of her own ribbon against her fingertips, and she did not pull it away. The doors of the war room slammed open. Veshin Maro was running. Veshin Maro did not run. Veshin Maro walked, briskly when necessary, with the unhurried economy of a man who had survived 3 campaigns and 4 court purges by never, under any circumstances, looking afraid. But Veshin Maro was running now, and his face was the color of cold ash, and Sable felt Kale go rigid against her even before the first general spoke. "My king." Kale rose. The shift from kneeling man to standing king was so fast and so complete that Sable felt it like a change in the room's temperature. His hand caught her wrist and held it, and did not let go. "Speak." "The council has called an emergency session. They are convening within the hour. The Lord Regent—" Veshin drew a breath. "The Lord Regent has informed them that you have been bewitched by a kitchen servant. He is calling for the girl to be brought before the council and put to the question." Sable's blood stopped moving. Kale's hand on her wrist tightened. "The Lord Regent." His voice was very soft and very quiet, and it raised every hair on Sable's arms. "My uncle, my father's brother, has called for my mate to be put to the question." "Yes, my king." "On what grounds?" "He says she has used dark magic to ensnare your wolf. He says the ribbon is a witch thread. He says she must be examined by the council's own readers, and if she is found to be the source of the binding, she must be—" Veshin's jaw worked. "Put to the cleansing fire." Sable did not feel her knees go. She felt the world go. She felt the entire stone room tilt sideways, and the green ribbon at Kale's throat seemed to glow faintly against his bare skin, though that might have been her vision narrowing, and somewhere very far away she heard a low rumbling growl beginning in the throat of the man who was holding her wrist. "Veshin," Kale said. "My king. Send word to my uncle that I will attend the session. Send word that I will bring the girl. Send word that I will explain to the council, in person, exactly what kind of witchcraft has bound me." Kale turned his head and looked down at Sable, and his amber eyes were burning. "And Veshin." "Yes, my king. Tell my uncle to look very carefully at his own hands when I walk into that room, because the moment I see his face, I will know whether he is the one who did this. And if he is—" The growl deepened. "If he is," Kale said softly, "no council in the world will save him." The council chamber was older than the keep itself. Sable had not known this. Sable had not known many things about the building she had spent her life inside. She knew the kitchens and the laundries and the back stairs and the herb-drying loft, and that was the whole of her geography. And now Kale was leading her through corridors of pale stone that grew older and colder and more strangely carved with every turn. And she understood that the keep was not one building but many, that great houses grew like trees, that there were rings of stone within rings of stone, and that the council chamber was at the heart of the oldest ring, where the first wolf kings had set the foundation. He had not let go of her hand. He had dressed, in the small antechamber behind the war room. He had pulled on a black linen shirt and a dark coat, and fine boots, and a long sword belted at his hip. And he had not said a word while he did it. And Sable had watched and tried not to look at the long, lean lines of his back, and tried not to think about the fact that an hour ago she had been a girl who had never touched a man, and now she was a girl who had cradled the head of a king against her belly. He had emerged dressed as a king, pale and cold and beautiful, but he had taken her hand the moment he stepped through the antechamber door, and he had not let go. The green ribbon was no longer at his throat. It was tied now, around her wrist. He had done it himself, kneeling, before they left. "Where it belongs," he had said, and Sable had not been able to answer. "Listen to me," Cale said now, very low, as they came to the great iron-banded doors of the council chamber. "When we walk in, you will not speak. You will stand at my left hand and you will look at no one but me. Whatever they say, whatever they ask, whatever my uncle does, you do not speak unless I tell you to. Do you understand?" "Yes." "And Sable?" "Yes." "If anything happens, if they try to take you, if they reach for you, you go to the wall behind the throne. There is a tapestry there of a hunting scene. Behind the tapestry there is a door. Vasion will be on the other side. Run for that door. Do not look back. Do not wait for me. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "But I do not want to leave you." He looked down at her. The amber of his eyes had gone very dark. "I am not the one in danger today, my heart," he said. The endearment landed in her chest like a hot stone. He did not seem to notice that he had said it. He turned, and he pushed open the doors, and the council chamber opened before them, and Sable Farrowin walked into the heart of the kingdom on the arm of its king. The chamber was a great round room of white stone. The ceiling was a vaulted dome painted with stars. A long curved table of black wood ran along 3/4 of the wall, and behind it sat 11 men and 3 women in robes of council gray, and at the head of the table, in a high carved chair set on a low dais, sat the Lord Regent. He looked like Cale. That was the first thing Sable understood, and it was a thing that made her stomach turn. He looked like Cale in the way a winter looks like a summer, the same shape of the face but every warmth taken out of it. He was older. His hair was iron gray. His eyes were the same amber as his nephew's, and they were colder than any eyes Sable had ever seen, and they fixed on her the moment she walked through the door, and she felt, with the bone-deep certainty of a small animal that has been seen by a hawk, that this man wanted her dead. "Nephew." The Lord Regent's voice was smooth as river stones. "You have brought the witch." "I have brought the woman," Cale said, "whose name is Sable Farrowin, and who is under my protection, and whom you will address with courtesy, or you will not address at all." A murmur went through the council. Cale did not appear to hear it. "My king," said one of the older counselors, a woman in deep blue robes whose face Sable did not know. "The accusation before this body is that the girl has used a witch thread to bind your wolf. The thread has been seen. It is unnatural. We do not deny that you are besotted, my king, but we ask that the girl be examined." "She has been examined." "My king?" "By the spirit reader of the Cliff Temple. This morning. Before any of you even knew her name. The reading is done. The findings are clear. Sable Farrowin carries the wolf mark of a true mate of the line of Arden, and the thread you fear is the binding thread her mother tied around her wrist when she was an infant, to bring her safely to the one she belonged to. The thread has done its work. The girl is mine. There is no witchcraft. There is only the oldest magic in this kingdom, working as it was made to work, and any of you who would burn her for it would burn the bones of your own grandmothers. The chamber went very, very quiet. The Lord Regent smiled. It was a small, slow, terrible smile. Sable did not understand it at first. Then she did. And she felt her hand begin to shake in Kale's, and Kale felt it, and his thumb moved, very slightly, against the back of her wrist. "Nephew," the Lord Regent said, "the Cliff Temple spirit reader is a known eccentric. She has been excluded from court readings for a decade. Her opinion is interesting, but not binding. The council's own readers must verify." "The council's own readers serve you." "They serve the realm." "They serve you, uncle. They have served you since my father died and you nearly took the throne from a boy of 15. They will say what you tell them to say. We both know this. Let us not insult the air of this chamber by pretending otherwise." The murmur came again, sharper this time. The Lord Regent's smile did not move. "You are tired, nephew. You have not slept. The girl has affected you. We understand. We are willing to be patient. But the council will sit, and the readers will read, and the law will be observed. And if the girl is innocent, she has nothing to fear." "The girl," Kale said softly, "has everything to fear, in a chamber where you have spoken." He turned. He looked at Sable. He smiled at her. Very small, very tired, very tender, in a way that made her understand he was about to do something none of them expected. He lifted her hand, the one with the green ribbon now tied around her wrist, and he raised it to his mouth, and he pressed his lips to her knuckles in front of the entire council of Salanthe. Then he looked at his uncle. "I name her," he said, "before this council, and before the wolves of this realm, and before the old gods who set the first stones of this chamber. I name her my mate. I name her my queen. I name her under my protection from this hour until my last breath. And any hand laid on her is a hand laid on me, and any reader who reads her is a reader who reads me, and any fire lit beneath her is a fire I will walk into first. Do any of you doubt that I will?" No one spoke. The Lord Regent's smile at last slipped. "Nephew," his voice was quieter now, tighter. "You cannot. I can. I have. It is done." Kale's amber eyes did not leave his uncle's face. "And now, uncle, I would like to ask you a question. In front of this council. In front of these witnesses. So that we may all hear your answer together." "Ask." "3 nights ago," Kale said, "someone slipped a draft into the wine I drink before sleep. I did not notice it the first night. I did not notice it the second. On the 3rd night, I tasted the bitterness, and I poured the cup into the fire, and I went hunting instead. And on that hunt, my wolf found the girl who is now standing at my left hand. So I would like to ask you, uncle, in front of this council, who has been putting Moon's Bane in my wine?" The silence in the room was the silence of a held breath that has gone on too long. The Lord Regent did not answer. He did not have to. Because his hand, the one resting on the carved arm of his chair, was not quite steady. And Sable, who had spent 18 years watching the hands of cooks and stewards and mistresses for the small, involuntary movements that told you what they were really thinking, saw the tremor at once. And so did Kale. She felt his whole body still beside her, with the particular stillness of a wolf that has just located its prey. "Veshin," Kale said. His voice was almost pleasant. "Take my uncle into custody." The council erupted. 3 of the gray-robed councillors were on their feet. 2 were shouting. The Lord Regent had risen, and his amber eyes had gone wide and pale with something that was not yet fear, but was on the road to it, and his mouth was opening to say a word that he never managed to say, because at that moment the great iron-banded doors of the council chamber slammed open for the 2nd time that day, and a woman walked in. She was tall. She was beautiful in a sharp white way that hurt to look at. the kind of beauty a sword might have if a sword were given a face. Her hair was the color of pale wheat, her eyes were the color of frozen rivers. She wore traveling clothes still dusty from the road, and a long, dark cloak, and at her hip was a curved knife in a worked silver sheath that Sable's eyes flinched away from without knowing why. She walked to the center of the council chamber as though she had been walking there all her life. She stopped 2 paces from Kale. She looked at him with a small, slow, knowing smile. "My love," she said. "I came as soon as I heard. What is this nonsense about a kitchen girl?" Kale's hand on Sable's, which had been warm and steady through the entire confrontation, went suddenly cold. Sable looked up at him. His face had gone the color of bone. "Who is she?" Sable whispered. Kale did not answer. It was the Lord Regent who answered, from his place by the high carved chair. And the smile, when it came back to his mouth, was a small, private, terrible thing. "Nephew," he said, "surely you have not forgotten. This is the Lady Iseltha of Virne, your betrothed, to whom you were promised, by your father's own hand, when you were 9 years old." Sable did not move. The room had become very small, or perhaps she had. She was aware of the green ribbon around her wrist, and of the cold hand of the king who was no longer looking at her, and of the pale woman with the river-colored eyes who had walked into the chamber as though she owned it, and of the slow private smile of the Lord Regent on his dais. She was aware, with a clarity that felt almost like floating, that she was about to learn something that would change the shape of her own face when she looked at it next. She did not look up at Kale. She could not. "My king." The Lady Iseltha's voice was smooth as new cream. "Will you not greet me? It has been 4 years." Kale's jaw worked. He did not release Sable's hand. If anything, his grip tightened, the small, careful tightening of a man holding onto a rope in a wind he had not expected. "Iseltha," he said, "you should not be here." "I should not?" Her pale eyebrows rose. "I am told my betrothed has been bewitched by a kitchen girl and is parading her before the council as his queen. Where else should I be?" "You are not my betrothed. Your father would disagree. My father is dead. And his word lives on, my king, as the words of dead kings do." She turned her head, and her river-colored eyes settled on Sable for the first time, and Sable felt the look move down her body the way a cold finger moves down a spine. "Is this her?" Kale did not answer. The Lady Iseltha smiled. "She is small," she said. "She is thin. Her hair is unwashed. There is grease on the cuff of her dress. My king, I do not say this to be cruel, but you must see that you have been used. The thread on her wrist is a witch thread. Whoever made it has played upon your wolf's loneliness. You are not yourself. You have not been yourself since the night you went riding alone 3 nights ago and came home with that ribbon around your throat." The council had gone very still. The Lord Regent had not moved. His private smile had not moved. He sat in his high chair like a man watching a play he had paid to see, and Sable understood with the same bone-deep certainty as before that this was not a coincidence, that the Lady Iseltha had not arrived by accident, that the knife at her hip and the river cold of her eyes and the timing of her entrance had all been arranged, and that the Lord Regent had been waiting for this exact moment for longer than 3 nights. She drew a breath. She had been told not to speak. She remembered. "You will not speak, unless I tell you to." She had agreed. She had meant it. She had walked into this chamber with every intention of standing silent at the king's left hand and being, for once in her life, the small, obedient thing that did not draw attention. But she felt Kale's hand around hers. She felt his stillness. She felt, in a way she could not have explained, that he was trapped. That he had been trapped before she walked into this room and had not known the shape of his cage until the cage walked through the door in the form of a woman with pale wheat hair, and that he was now trying to think his way out of a corner that had been built around him while he was busy looking at her. She thought of the kitchen. She thought of the head cook, who had once told her, "Girl, the only way out of a tight corner is forward and loud, because the loudness makes them flinch, and the forward gets you past them before they remember to put out a hand." Sable Farrowin, who had never spoken in a room with more than 3 people in it, lifted her chin. "My lady," she said. Her voice was small. It was steadier than she had expected. "My name is Sable Farrowin. I am 18 years old. I am an undercook of the lower hearths. I have never in my life met a witch. I have never in my life cast a spell. I have never met the king before this morning, and I have never spoken to him before this hour. The thread on my wrist was tied there by my mother when I was an infant, and the spirit reader of the Cliff Temple has read it, and her reading is in the war room with the king's first general, and any of you may go and see it." She paused. She drew another breath. "And, my lady, with respect, I do not know what kind of witchcraft a kitchen girl could possibly use that would walk a king's wolf into a place she did not know he was going. I did not know my ribbon was missing until this morning. I have been searching for it on my hands and knees in the hallways since dawn. If I had a witchcraft strong enough to bind the Alpha King of Salanthe, my lady, I would have used it long before now. I would have used it to be allowed an extra blanket in winter." A small sound came from somewhere in the council. A counselor in dark green robes had laughed and stifled it, and was now examining the table in front of him with great care. The Lady Iseltha's smile did not move. Her river-cold eyes did. "How charming," she said. "The kitchen girl has wit. My king, I think you will agree, this is exactly the kind of clever-tongued creature your wolf would be drawn to. Is it not?" "Iseltha." Kale's voice was very quiet. "Why are you here?" "Because I was sent for." "By whom?" She looked at the Lord Regent. She did it openly, without trying to hide it. A small, slow tilt of her head, the smile on her mouth widening just enough to be insolent. She wanted Kale to see. She wanted him to know. Kale saw. His hand around Sable's went for one moment so tight that Sable had to bite the inside of her cheek not to make a sound. Then it loosened, deliberately, finger by finger, and Kale drew in a breath that seemed to start somewhere very deep in his chest, and when he spoke again his voice was softer than it had been all morning. "Vishen, my king, take the Lady Iseltha into custody as well." "My king, you cannot," began the Lord Regent. "I can. I have. It is done." Kale's amber eyes never left his uncle's face. Conspiracy, poisoning, conspiracy with a foreign house against the crown, conspiracy to murder a daughter of the realm, charges to be formally read in the next session. In the meantime, both of you, into the lower keep, separate cells, Vishen, no books, no visitors, no messages. I will know who else has been writing to my uncle, and I will know it before the moon turns. The Lord Regent rose. He did it slowly, with the dignity of a man who had spent his life rising slowly from carved chairs. His amber eyes, so like his nephew's, fixed on Kale with a look of such open hatred that Sable understood finally how dangerous the smiling man in the high chair had always been. "Boy," he said, "you will regret this." "I have regretted things before, uncle. I will regret this less than most. You think you have won. I have not won. I have stopped losing for one afternoon. There is a difference, and I have learned it in the last hour. And I owe the lesson to the girl whose ribbon you tried to use against me." The Lord Regent's eyes flickered to Sable. It was the briefest of looks. A glance, less than a heartbeat. But in it was a promise, and Sable Farrowin read the promise as clearly as she had ever read anything in her life. "I will kill you," the look said. "Not today. Not in this chamber. But I will kill you, kitchen girl, and I will do it before the moon turns, and you should have stayed on your knees looking for your ribbon." Then Veshan's guards were around him, and around the Lady Iseltha, and they were being led, not gently, from the chamber. The Lady Iseltha did not protest. She did not struggle. She walked between her captors with the same easy grace as she had walked in, and at the door she turned her head, and her river-cold eyes found Kyle, and she smiled. "My king," she said, "I will see you again, sooner than you think." The doors closed behind her. Kale did not move. He stood with Sable's hand in his and his eyes on the closed doors, and the chamber around them was full of counselors who did not know what to do with their faces, and the silence stretched, and stretched, and stretched, until Sable understood that the silence would not break unless she broke it. "My king," she whispered. He looked down. "Take me out of this room," she said. "Please, I cannot stand here anymore." He nodded once. He did not speak. He turned, with her hand in his, and he walked her out of the council chamber of Salanthi, past 14 counselors who rose as he passed, and not one of them met his eyes. In the corridor, with the great iron doors closed behind them, Sable's knees gave out at last. He caught her. He lifted her against his chest as though she weighed nothing, and he carried her down the long old hallways of the oldest ring of the keep, and he did not put her down until they were back in the war room, and he laid her on the long couch beneath the high window, and he knelt beside the couch and pressed his forehead against the green ribbon on her wrist, and Sable Farrowin, who had not cried in 8 years because cooks did not cry in the Salanthi kitchens, cried. He did not tell her to stop. He did not say anything at all. He stayed. She slept for 2 hours. She had not meant to. She had meant only to close her eyes for a moment against the brightness of the high window and to rest her hand on the dark hair of the man kneeling beside her, and to feel the slow, steady warmth of his forehead against her wrist. But the body, when it has been frightened for long enough, takes whatever rest it is offered, and Sable's body had been frightened for a great many hours, and when she opened her eyes again, the light through the window had moved, and the bar of pale gold had become a bar of pale orange, and Cale was sitting on the floor beside the couch, with his back against the wood, and his head tipped against the cushion near her hip, asleep. He looked younger, asleep. She studied him in the late light. The crooked front tooth she had noticed earlier was visible now between his slightly parted lips. The faded kettle burn along his collarbone. The lines at the corners of his eyes that had no business being on a man not yet 35. The dark lashes against his cheekbones. The slow rise and fall of his chest, and the small twitch of his fingers in his sleep, which she understood without being told, was the wolf running through the meadows of a dream. She did not wake him. She put her hand, very carefully, on the crown of his head, the way she had done in the morning, and she let her fingers move through his hair. And the wolf in his dream made a small soft sound that she felt under her palm, and her chest hurt in a way she did not know what to do with. She had loved him already. She had not had a word for it until now. She had loved him, in the strange, wordless way of a girl loving a king she had never spoken to. Since some night long ago when she had passed him in a corridor and not known who he was, only known that she had wanted to turn around and look at him and had not allowed herself to. Her body had recognized him before her mind had been told it was permitted. The wolf mark on her shoulder had been waiting for a hand, and her hand had been waiting for a head, and it had taken the magic in a green ribbon and the corruption of an uncle to bring them into the same room. She did not know what to do with the knowledge. She let it sit in her chest. It was a strange weight. It was also, she found, the most peaceful weight she had ever carried. The door of the war room opened very softly. Veshan stepped inside, took in the scene without expression, and crossed to the couch. He did not speak. He laid a small folded piece of paper on the cushion beside Sable, gave her a small bow, and withdrew. Sable read the note. It was in a careful, almost childish hand. To the kitchen girl, who is now a queen. From a friend in the lower keep. They will come for you tonight, before the moon rises. There is more than one. They are inside the walls. The wolf cannot smell them because they wear the king's own livery. Trust no guard you do not know by face. Trust no door that opens easily. I am sorry. I would have warned you sooner. Sable's hand, which had been moving in Kale's hair, stilled. Halver. Mistress Halver, who had told her that morning to lie. Mistress Halver, who had known something was coming, who had been frightened in a way Sable had never seen her frightened, who had stood in the corridor outside the kitchens and looked at Sable as though looking at her for the last time. Mistress Halver had a friend in the lower keep. Mistress Halver had seen something, or heard something, or pieced something together from the 10,000 small things a head of household saw in a day, and now Mistress Halver was warning her. There was more than one. They were inside the walls. They wore the king's own livery. Sable looked down at the sleeping man with his head against her hip, and at the soft, slow rise of his chest, and at the small twitch of his fingers in his dream. And she understood, all at once, and very clearly, what she had to do. She had to leave the war room. If they came for her here, they would come through Kael. They would have to. The wolf would not let her be taken from a room he was sleeping in, and the man would not let her be taken from a room he was sleeping in. And either way, the people who came through the door would have to come through him first. And there would be more than one of them. And they would wear the king's own livery, which meant the wolf would not recognize them as enemies until it was too late, and the man would not see the knife until the knife was already moving. She could not let them come through him. She had to draw them somewhere else. She had to do it before he woke. She did the hardest thing she had ever done. She took her hand out of his hair. She slid herself very slowly, off the couch on the side away from him. She did not breathe. She did not let the cushion creak. She stood up in her stockinged feet on the cold stone floor, and she looked down at the Alpha King of Salanthi, asleep against the side of a couch with his face turned toward the place she had just been, and she pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth so that she would not make a sound. She had loved him for one day. It was already enough. She crossed the room without sound. She stopped at the great oak doors. She opened one, just enough, and slipped through, and pulled it closed behind her. In the corridor, the late orange light was going gray. Veshin was at the far end of the hall, his back to her, speaking quietly to one of his own captains. Sable did not call to him. Veshin would stop her. Veshin would carry her bodily back into the war room and lock the door, and the men who came tonight would come anyway, and they would come through Kale, and she could not bear it. She turned the other way. She did not know this part of the keep. She had never been on this floor. But she had spent 18 years memorizing the back stairs and the laundry chutes and the small, unnoticed passages that servants used to move around great houses without disturbing the people who lived in them. There were always such passages. They were the bones of the building. She walked along the corridor with her hand on the cold stone wall, and she found, as she had known she would, a narrow door without a handle, set flush into the paneling, the kind of door that opened only when you pressed a particular stone in the wall beside it. She found the stone. She pressed it. The door opened. She stepped into the dark. The passage smelled of old dust and mouse droppings and the faint sweetness of beeswax. She closed the door behind her and stood for a moment in absolute blackness, listening to her own heartbeat, and then she began to walk. She did not know where the passage went. She only knew it went down. She walked down. She walked down for a long time. The stone under her stockinged feet grew colder. The air grew colder. At one point she heard from somewhere on the other side of the wall 2 voices speaking in low, quick tones, and one of them was saying the lower hearths, and the other was saying no, the war room. He sleeps there now, the captain said, and Sable pressed herself against the wall, and did not breathe, and did not move until the voices passed. There were 2 of them, at least. They wore the king's livery. She had seen the boots, through a crack in the paneling when they passed. She kept walking down. She came out, at last, in a place she knew. A small storeroom behind the laundry sheds, where the dirty linens were piled before the morning wash. She had been in this storeroom 100 times. She knew the door. She knew the latch. She knew the courtyard beyond, and the postern gate beyond the courtyard, and the lane beyond the postern gate that ran along the outer wall of the keep and curved away into the woods. She slipped through the storeroom. She slipped across the courtyard, hugging the shadow of the laundry shed. She reached the postern gate. The bolt was drawn back. The bolt should not have been drawn back. The bolt was always thrown at sundown. The bolt being drawn back meant that someone had come in, or was about to go out, or was waiting for someone else to come or go, and Sable did not have the time to think about which. She slid through the gate. The lane was empty. She ran. She did not know where she was running to. She had no money, no shoes, and no cloak. The night air bit her arms through the wool of her dress. The frost had begun to silver the cobbles of the lane, and her stockinged feet went numb almost at once, and she ran anyway, because the only thing in her mind was away from him, away from him, away from him, draw them away from him. She had not got 50 paces before the hand closed around her arm. It was a man's hand. It was wearing the king's livery. He smelled of stale wine and oiled leather. He pulled her back against his chest with the easy, practiced strength of a man who had done this work before, and his other hand pressed a cloth that smelled of something sweet and rotten over her nose and mouth. And Sable understood, in the last clear moment before the world blurred, that she had done exactly what they had wanted her to do. She had walked out of the keep on her own feet. There had been no need to come for her at all. Somewhere very far away, behind walls she could no longer see, a wolf began to howl. Cale came awake howling. He did not remember sitting up. He did not remember crossing the room. He remembered only the absence beside him, the place on the couch where her warmth had been and where her warmth was no longer, and the cold, smooth surface of a folded piece of paper under his hand where his cheek had rested, and the smell, faint and fading, of bread flour and crushed thyme and rosemary soap, and her moving away from him through stone. Veshin was at the door before the howl had finished. "My king." "She is gone." "What?" "She is gone, Veshin. She is not in this room. She has been gone." Cale lifted his face. His amber eyes were already changing. The pupils had blown. The whites had gone gold. Long enough for the scent to thin. Half an hour. Perhaps more. Veshin. The first general had already turned and was already shouting. Bells began to ring in the lower keep. Boots began to pound in the corridors. Cale did not hear any of it. He was reading the note, the small, careful note in Mistress Halvor's hand, and his face as he read it went the color of cold ash and then the color of cold iron. And by the time he reached the bottom of the page, the man had already begun to dissolve, the wolf already coming up through the bones of his shoulders, and Veshin turned back from the door and saw and lifted both his hands. My king, wait, wait. Where will you start? The keep is enormous. We do not know which gate. Kyle was not listening. He had crossed the war room in 3 strides. He had thrown open the door of the small chamber where she had slept the night before. He had bent over the bed where her body had lain. He had pressed his face into the pillow and breathed, and his shoulders had shuddered. And when he straightened, the wolf was so close to the surface that the hands at his sides were already half claw. Postern, he said. She went out the postern, the laundry passage. I can smell the soap of the linens on the air she breathed. Tell the gate guard to open every door I come to, or I will come through the doors. Move, Veshin. He did not wait. He was running before the order was finished. He went out of the war room and down the long corridor and down the back stair, and down the second back stair, and through the storeroom behind the laundry sheds and across the cold courtyard with the frost already breaking under his boots. And at the postern gate he did not stop, did not slow, did not bother with the bolt. He went through the gate as a man and came out the other side as a wolf, the shift catching him mid-stride with a force that nearly broke the gateposts, the leather of his coat splitting along the seams as the great black body burst out of the man. He did not feel the cold. He did not feel anything. He had her scent. It went left, along the lane, then sharper left, then into a stand of trees, then into a clearing where the grass had been crushed by the hooves of horses, and there the scent stopped. There, in the cold, churned mud of the clearing, Cale lost her. The wolf circled. Once, twice, 3 times. He pressed his nose to every inch of the ground. He found the place where she had stood. He found the place where her stockinged feet had stopped moving. He found the place where she had been lifted off the ground. He found the smell of stale wine and oiled leather and a sweet rotten chemical that he knew at once was black moss, the sleeping draught. And beneath all of it, very faintly, he found the smell of her. Her fear. The small, high, sharp note of a girl who had understood, in her last conscious moment, that she had been outplayed. The wolf threw his head back. He howled. He howled until his lungs burned, until his throat tore, until every wolf in the keep, and every wolf in the village, and every wolf for 10 miles in any direction had heard him and knew. He howled in a language none of them had heard from him before, the howl of a creature whose mate had been taken, and the wolves of Salanthe, who had not had a true alpha mate howl in 9 generations, lifted their heads in the dusk and answered as one. When Veshen and the riders reached the clearing, the wolf was standing in the center of it, motionless, with his nose pointed east. "My king." Kel did not turn his head. "Tell me about my uncle." The voice rang through Veshen's mind with the iron of an order. The first general drew a careful breath. "He is in the lower keep. 3 guards on the cell. None of them his own. He has not spoken to anyone since we put him in. The lady Iseltha. The same. Separate corridor. No contact. Both have been searched. Neither carried any tools. Then how?" "My king?" "Then how, Veshen, did the men who took her wear my livery? How did they pass the gate? How did they know which passage she would use? Who told them? Who is still telling them? Because my uncle has not spoken in 3 hours, and the lady Iseltha has not spoken in 3 hours, and yet my mate is gone, and the men who took her knew she would come out the postern alone in stockinged feet at dusk, and someone told them, and that someone is still inside the walls of my keep." Vishen's mouth went dry. "My king, there is a thing I have not told you, because I was not certain. But the morning your uncle's hands were trembling in the council chamber, before he sat down, he was speaking to a man in dark green livery, a captain. I did not know the captain's face. Find him. Yes, my king. Find him before I come back. Because when I come back, Veshen, I will be coming back with my mate, and I will not be in a mood to ask questions twice." The wolf turned his head at last. His amber eyes were not amber anymore. They were a deep burning gold that had no human in them at all. "East," he said. They went east. "Tell the riders to follow the road. Tell them not to overtake me. Tell them, if they find a body in the road, it is not hers, and they should leave it where it lies, until I have come back through." He did not wait for an answer. He went east. The wolf ran through the night. He ran through the cold and the dark and the silver edge of the rising moon. He ran through stands of pine and across frozen fields, and along the bank of a stream where ice was beginning to lace the shallows. He did not slow. He did not stop. The world narrowed in the wolf's mind to a single thread of scent on the wind, the small fading thread of a girl who smelled of bread flour and rosemary soap, and he followed the thread the way a man dying of thirst follows a sound of water, with no thought at all for what would happen when he reached it. Somewhere in the small dark hours, the thread led him to a hunting lodge. It was old. It was set back from the road. It was the kind of lodge the great houses of Salanthe had used 100 years ago and had largely forgotten, and it belonged, the wolf knew, without knowing how he knew, to the line of Virne, Iseltha's house. Of course. There were horses in the yard. There were men around a brazier. There were torches at the door. There were 6 of them. The wolf did not pause to count them twice. He came out of the dark like a thing the dark had birthed. The first man was down before he saw the wolf. The second man got out half a shout. The third was thrown back before his hand could close on the hilt of his sword. By the time the men around the brazier had understood what was happening, 3 of them were down, and the 4th was running. And the wolf did not bother with the runner because the runner was running away from her, and the wolf had no interest in anything in the world that was not the door of the lodge and the small fading scent on the other side of it. He went through the door. It was not locked. It was barred. The bar held for half a heartbeat against the weight of him, and then the bar splintered and the door splintered and the wolf was through, into a low, long room with a fire in the hearth, and a man in dark green livery rising from a stool with a cup of wine in his hand. The man saw the wolf. The man's face did a thing Cale would remember in the cleaner parts of his memory, with a kind of bleak satisfaction for the rest of his life. The cup of wine fell. The man's mouth opened. The man tried to run. The wolf let him. The wolf let him because the wolf could smell her, very close now, behind a small door at the far end of the room, and the wolf's interest in the running man was less than the wolf's interest in opening that door, and the running man would still be running when the wolf had finished, and the wolf would deal with him later. He hit the small door with his shoulder. It opened. She was on the floor. She was on her side, with her wrists bound in front of her, and her dark hair across her face, and the green ribbon still tied around her left wrist above the knot of the rope. Her eyes were closed. Her mouth was a little open. The smell of black moss came off her in waves, and beneath the smell of the drug Cale could smell, with the wolf's clean, terrible certainty that she was alive, that her heart was still moving, that the small, fierce, stubborn flame at the center of her chest had not gone out. He shifted. He did not mean to. The wolf did not mean to. But the man came up out of the wolf because the man's hands were the hands she knew, and Cale came to himself bare and shivering on the cold floor of the lodge, with the wolf still hot in his blood. He pulled a fallen man's shirt from the body nearest the door, and a heavy dark cloak from the peg above the hearth, and he was fastening the cloak around his shoulders before his hands had stopped shaking. Then he was on his knees beside her on the floor of the small dirty room, and he pulled her into his arms, and pressed his forehead to her forehead, and breathed her in, and his whole body began to shake again. Sable. She did not answer. Sable. Sable. Open your eyes, please. She did not open her eyes, but her hand, the one with the green ribbon around the wrist, moved, very slightly. A small twitch of her fingers, finding the cloth of his shirt closing on it. She did not wake. She did not speak. But her fingers held him, and Kyle Arden pressed his mouth to her hair and made a sound he would never be able to describe to anyone, a sound that was not a word and not a sob and not a howl, but something that contained all 3. And somewhere in the lodge behind him, a man in dark green livery was running for his life, and Cale did not care, because the only thing in the world that mattered was the small twitch of fingers in his shirt. I have you, he whispered. I have you. I have you. Outside, the moon was rising. Inside, her hand held his shirt, and the green ribbon on her wrist glowed faintly in the dark. The riders reached the lodge 2 hours before dawn. They found the bodies in the yard. They found the running man, half a mile down the road, who had not run far enough. They found the lodge door splintered on its hinges, and the long, low room with the fire dying in the hearth, and the small, dirty back room where the king of Salanthi was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, and a sleeping girl across his lap, his cloak wrapped around her, his hand stroking the dark hair away from her face with the slow, careful tenderness of a man who has stopped being a king and become only a man, and only briefly. Veshin knelt at the door. "My king." Kyle looked up. His amber eyes were hollow with exhaustion. The wolf was very far down. There was nothing left in him but the man, and the man had been running a long time, and the man was not going to be standing again for some hours. "Take us home," Kyle said. They took them home. Sable woke on the third day. She woke slowly, the way one wakes from a long drugged sleep, her body heavy and her mouth dry and her thoughts arriving one at a time and not in any particular order. She was warm. She was in a great bed she did not recognize. There was a window above her, through which she could see a winter sky. There was a small fire burning in a hearth across the room. There was a hand holding hers. She turned her head. Kyle was sitting in a chair beside the bed. His dark hair was loose. He had not shaved. The hollows under his amber eyes had darkened into bruises. He was wearing a clean linen shirt and dark breeches, and his feet were bare on the rug, and he had her hand against his mouth, and he was holding it there, very lightly, his breath warm against her knuckles. She watched him for a long moment. He did not know she was awake. She had time before he noticed to look at him, to take in the small white scar through his eyebrow, the crooked front tooth, the kettle burn on his collarbone, the slow rise and fall of his chest, the green ribbon, which was not on her wrist anymore, and which was not on his throat anymore, and which was on the small table beside the bed, neatly folded, like a thing waiting for its owner to decide what was to be done with it. "My king," she said. He did not move at once. He opened his eyes very slowly, like a man afraid the sound he had heard had not been real. He looked at her. His mouth did a small, unsteady thing. "Sable." "I am here," she said. He lowered his forehead to her hand and breathed. It was a long time before either of them spoke again. "I am sorry," she said at last. Her voice was a little hoarse. "I should not have left the war room. I thought they would come through you, and I could not." "I know. You know." Vaishon showed me the note. "From your mistress Halvar. She is in the kitchen still, by the way. I have given her a pension. She can retire whenever she wishes. She refuses. She says she will retire when she is dead." Sable laughed. It was a small, wet laugh, and it hurt her ribs, and it was the most surprising laugh of her life, because she had not expected to laugh ever again. And your uncle?" Kale's face did not change. "He confessed," he said quietly, "when the captain in dark green livery was caught running for the eastern border. The captain talked. The Lady Iselta talked. My uncle, when he understood that there would be no one left to lie for him, finally talked as well. He had been planning this for 14 years, Sable, since before I came of age. The marriage to Iselta was the last piece. He could not stop me from being king, so he was going to make me a king who could be ruled. The moonsbane was meant to soften my judgment. The ribbon, your ribbon, was meant to be his proof that I had been ensnared. Your existence was an inconvenience. He had not known about you. He would have learned, eventually. He had men in the kitchens. He had men everywhere. And now? And now he is in the lower keep. He will be tried before the Wolf Council in 3 weeks. The penalty for what he has done is death. I will not commute it." Kale's amber eyes were very tired. "I have spent 2 days arguing with myself about whether I should. I have decided. He tried to take you. I cannot forgive that. The wolf will not forgive that. And the kingdom needs to see, very clearly, what happens to the men who try to use the crown's own house against it." Sable nodded slowly. She did not have anything to say to that. She did not know yet how she felt about a man dying for what had been done to her. She suspected she would think about it for a long time. And the lady Iseltha? Stripped of her name, sent home to Vern in disgrace. Her family will spend the next 10 years trying to rebuild a reputation that no one in this kingdom is going to allow them to rebuild. A small, dry, tired smile. I am not as ungenerous as my uncle. I do not need her dead. I only need her finished. And me? He looked at her. You, he said softly. You are the question I do not yet know how to answer. Sable. I have been sitting beside this bed for 3 days, and I have not slept, and I have not eaten properly, and I have been thinking about you. I have been thinking about what I asked you in the war room, about staying, about letting me learn your face. I asked too much of you that day. I asked it before you had been given a single hour to be a person who got to choose what came next. You have been swept up in a thing that began before you were born, and I have been swept up with you, and we have not had a single quiet moment in which to ask, the two of us, what we actually want. He set her hand down. He folded his own hands in his lap. He looked at her with an expression she did not yet have a name for. So, I'm going to ask now, he said, slowly, with time, Sable Farrowin. The wolf mark on your shoulder is real. The binding thread is real. The bond is real. None of those things are choices. They were made for us, by your mother, and by the old gods, and by the blood we did not pick. But every choice that comes after them is yours. You can stay in the keep. I will give you a household. I will give you a name and a place and a teacher and a life. You will not be required to be my queen. You will not be required to be anything to me at all. You can take a year. You can take 10. You can take the rest of your life to decide. Or, she whispered, or you can tell me on whatever day you are ready that you have decided. And I will be here, because I am not going anywhere, Sable. Not from this room. Not from this keep. Not from the small space 3 paces from your shoulder. I have been waiting for you my whole life, and I did not know it. And now that I know it, I find that waiting longer is not a hardship. It is, in fact, the only thing I am sure I am good at. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. She thought of the kitchen, of the 18 years of cold flagstones and shouting cooks, and the small green ribbon that had been the only thing in the world that was hers. She thought of the wolf laying his head across her feet on the cold stone floor. She thought of the man kneeling on the floor of the war room with his forehead against her belly, weeping. She thought of the small twitch of her own fingers in his shirt, in a dirty room in a hunting lodge, in the last moment before the world had gone dark. She thought of love. She had loved him already. She had known this on the couch in the war room, watching him sleep. She had thought then that her loving him was a small private thing, the kind of thing a kitchen girl was allowed to keep in her chest like a stone in a pocket. She had not understood then that he had been carrying the same stone in the same pocket for years and years, and not known what it was. She lifted her hand. She set it on his cheek. He closed his eyes. My king, she said. Sable. I do not need a year. I do not need 10. I have been a girl who scrubbed hearths for 18 years. I am very practiced at deciding fast and being right. His mouth did the small, unsteady thing again. Sable. I will stay, she said. I will learn your face. I will let you learn mine. I will be your queen, when we have decided together that I am ready. And in the meantime, my king, you may sit beside this bed for as long as you wish, but you may also, if you would prefer, sit on it. I have been cold for 3 days, and I am told I have a wolf, and I would like to know whether the rumor is true. He laughed. He laughed. and the laugh broke into something that was not quite a sob, and he climbed into the great bed beside her and gathered her against his chest, and she pressed her cheek into the warm hollow of his throat, where the ribbon used to be, and she felt, for the first time in 18 years, that she had come home to a place she had never been. The green ribbon on the small table beside the bed lay still. Its work was done. A year passed. The wolves of Salanthe spoke afterward of the strange long winter that followed the king's wedding, in which the snows came late, and the harvests came early, and the great old trees of the eastern forest, which had not bloomed in 9 generations, blossomed in spring with small white flowers no one in the kingdom remembered the name of. The spirit reader of the Cliff Temple was asked to explain. The spirit reader said only that the land had been waiting, as the king had been waiting, as the wolf had been waiting, and that what had been broken in the line of Arden had at last been made whole, and that broken things, when they are made whole, often celebrate in odd ways. The Lord Regent was tried and executed at the spring equinox. The Lady Iseltha by then had been forgotten by everyone except the spirit reader, who occasionally smiled to herself for no reason her young apprentices could discern. Sable Farrowin became, in time, Queen Sable of Salanthe. She did not stop being the girl who had scrubbed hearths. She visited the lower kitchens twice a week, and Mistress Halver scolded her for putting her hands in dishwater, and the head cook pretended not to notice, and the undercooks of the lower hearths fought, with great seriousness, for the privilege of bringing the queen her tea. Sable found, to her surprise, that she liked being a queen rather more than she had expected to. She had a great gift, it turned out, for noticing things no one else noticed, and for asking small quiet questions in council chambers, and for placing her hand on the arm of a husband whose temper had begun to slip, and bringing him back, with no more than a touch, to a place where he could think. The wolf followed her everywhere, especially in the early months, when Mistress Halver had begun to cluck about the queen's appetite and the way the queen's gowns were being let out at the waist. The wolf by then slept across the foot of their bed every night, and nudged her hand with his nose every morning, and laid his great head on her belly in the afternoons when she sat in the south solar with her embroidery, and made low, quiet sounds of approval at whatever he heard or felt or knew. The spirit reader, when she came to the keep that midsummer to do the readings, smiled her cracked old smile and said, "Twins, my queen and Sable," who had suspected for some time, only nodded and laid her hand on the wolf's broad head. The twins, when they came, were a girl and a boy. The girl was born first. She had the dark hair of her mother and the amber eyes of her father, and a small, soft, curl-shaped mark, the color of old wine, on her left shoulder. The boy came after. He had the amber eyes of his father and the dark hair of his mother, and on the back of his right hand a small soft mark like the shadow of a leaf, and the spirit reader, when she saw it, did not explain what it meant, only said that the line of Arden was now woven into a future no one had quite expected, and that the small leaf mark was a thing the wolves of the keep would be talking about for a long time. Cale Arden held his children. He wept, once, when he thought no one was looking. He sat on the edge of the great bed with his daughter in one arm and his son in the other, and his eyes on the face of the woman he had been waiting for since before he had known how to wait. And he understood, with the slow clarity of a man at the exact center of his own life, that he had been given more than he had ever asked for. "Sable, my king, thank you." She did not ask what for. She knew what for. She lifted her hand, very tired, and laid it against his cheek, and the wolf at the foot of the bed lifted his great head and made a small, low, contented sound that filled the room like a hearth fire. On the small table beside the bed, the green ribbon lay folded. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Sable would pick it up. She would turn it over in her fingers. She would think of the long-ago hands that had tied it around the wrist of an infant and given that infant to a foundling gate, with no name, No message, no map, only the small, fierce act of faith that the thread would do what it had been made to do. She would think of her mother, whoever her mother had been. She would think, sometimes, that the world was not a kind place, but that it was, occasionally, a precise one, and that precision, when it caught you, could feel very nearly like kindness. Then she would set the ribbon back on the table, and the wolf at the foot of the bed would breathe out, slow and warm, and the keep, around them, would be very quiet. And outside the window, the snows of Salanthe would be falling, slow and silver, on a kingdom that had at last, after a long, cold waiting, been brought home. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.